Coalition for Responsible Government is Marilyn Musselmel. Marilyn Musselmel is our winner of the Patriot Wines from the PA Coalition for Responsible Government. I first would like to introduce our panel. To my far right is Ms. Leslie Heiner from the Foundation for Educational Choice. Leslie is the Vice President of Programs and State Relations. She directs educational programs on state relations for the Foundation for Educational Choice. In her work for the Legacy Foundation of Milton and Rose Friedman, she strives to advance the Friedman's vision of universal school choice to improve educational outcomes and preserve individual liberty. Prior to joining the foundation, Leslie served as Chief of Staff to the Speaker of the House or Republican leader in the Indiana House of Representatives. Leslie's experience also includes service as General Counsel and Elections Deputy of the Indiana Secretary of State, Counsel to the State Recount Commissioner, and her appointment as Majority Attorney to the President Pro Tem of the Indiana State Senate. So please join me in welcoming Leslie Heiner. And to my immediate right, he's a good friend of mine, Mr. Richard Dick Comer. Dick serves as the senior attorney at the Institute for Justice. He litigates school choice cases in both federal and state courts. Several of his current cases involve the constitutionality of allowing school choice programs to include religious schools among the private schools that can participate. He is the Institute of Justice resident expert on state blame amendments. Prior to his work at the Institute of Justice, Dick worked as a career civil rights lawyer for the federal government, working at the Department of Education and Justice, as well at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, first as a special assistant to the chairman, Clarence Thomas, and then as director of the Office of Legal Counsel. He ended his government employment as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the Department of Education. Dick has worked at the Institute of Justice since '93, although most of the time he has worked part-time, spending the rest of his time taking care of his two children. He received his law degree from the University of Virginia and his BA from Harvard. To my immediate left is my senator, the Honorable Jeffrey Piccola. State Senator Piccola represents 15th, I apologize, please join me in welcoming the Honorable Dick Comer. And of course, again to my immediate left, the Senator Piccola, who's also a dear friend as well as my state senator. He has served since '95, when he won a special election before coming to the Senate. He served in the State House of Representatives for nearly 2 decades. Senator Piccola is the chairman of the State Education Committee, in which his focus has been on providing greater efficiency and accountability in our public education system and empowering students and families so that they have a greater say in their educational choices. Prior to being appointed chairman, Senator Piccola actively served on the Senate Education Committee since '95. He worked closely with former Governor Ridge and his administration in enacting a number of Pennsylvania's education reform initiatives, including the charter school law and the subsequent approval for the operation of cyber charter schools, the Education Improvement Tax Credit Program, tenure and sabbatical reform, professional development for teachers, and service on the Governor's Advisory Commission on Academic Standards. In addition to education reform, Senator Piccola's other legislative accomplishments and priorities include revitalizing our cities, improving the state's business climate, and keeping the cost of government down. Again, please join me in welcoming Senator Piccola. And of course, last but not least, a gentleman that I sincerely don't believe he needs any introduction. However, his accomplishments are so far that I think it's important to enter in a record the impact that this gentleman has had on the Patriot movement. His name is Matt Kibbe. Matt is the president and CEO of FreedomWorks. He has been with the organization previously known as Citizens for Sound Economy. For over 12 years, an economist by training, Matt Kibbe, who is also a Pennsylvanian, I might add, is a well-respected, nationally public policy expert, best-selling author, and political commentator. Newsweek has called Kibbe one of the masterminds of the Tea Party politics, expertise which has led to frequent appearances on national news shows including Fox News, NBC, ABC News, CNN, MSNBC, Fox Business, PBS, and C-SPAN, and any other alphabet that's out there. I believe that Matt has participated. Kibbe has also been dubbed the Scribe, by the New York Daily News. He is the co-author with Dick Armey of the New York Best Time seller, Give Us Liberty, a Tea Party manifesto. Kibbe authored Rules for Patriots, a pocket primer for patriotic Americans. He has written for the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Investors Business Daily, Politico, The Washington Examiner, and numerous other national and online publications. He is also a regular contributor to Forbes.com, Red State, and FoxNews.com. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Kibbe. Thank you. Okay. The first question that I have is going to be directed to Ms. Heiner. Ms. Heiner, school choice is a term used by a lot of people, but it seems to mean different things to different people. How do you define school choice?
Thank you, Otto, and good morning, everyone. School choice is a term that we hear a lot these days. As you'll notice, the lovely people who are in the audience today wearing those beautiful red T-shirts that say on the back, school choice. That's wonderful. Thank you for wearing those. I have to comment on those. The question, though, then becomes, what is school choice? You'll find that some of the people who actually oppose what we would consider to be true freedom in education also talk pretty loosely about school choice. So for those of us who advocate parental freedom of choice in education, this is actually a very important question for us. At the Foundation for Educational Choice, as Milton and Rose Friedman's foundation, our definition is at the core. Educational scholarships, also known as vouchers, that is really at the heart of school choice. And very simply, it is putting the power of educational choice back into the hands of parents where it belongs. Now, vouchers goes to that directly. Tax credit scholarships, like you have here in Pennsylvania, have proven to be very successful. That also accomplishes the same thing. The state of Arizona recently, in fact just this week, passed an education savings account bill, which is a new type of system of putting control back into the hands of parents. So you'll be hearing more of that, I'm sure, in the coming years across the country. Those are all examples of, again, putting that power back into the hands of parents. And very specifically on the fiscal side, this puts the financial power into the hands of parents. So instead of the government having that financial power of saying, you will send your child to this school if you live within this particular box that we've drawn the lines for arbitrarily, by the way. Instead, it says, here, parent, you decide. This is your private choice. And that's what school choice is all about.
Thank you. Speaking of which, Mr. Comer, explain to me, what is the federal or constitutional standard as it relates to any school choice program?
That's a great question, Otto, and first let me thank you all for coming and for inviting me to be here. In 2002, the U.S. Supreme Court finally dealt with a school choice case, the Cleveland Voucher Program. It took us 10 years of effort, 6 previous court decisions in Ohio, state and federal courts, but we finally got to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the program against a challenge under the Establishment Clause brought by all of the usual suspects, but who were represented at the Supreme Court by 2 different attorneys, one representing the NEA and one representing the AFT. And in a 5-4 decision in Zellman versus Simmons-Harris, the U.S. Supreme Court said that it's basically 2 things that are necessary for a school choice program to pass constitutional muster under the federal Constitution. And those 2 things are that the program be religiously neutral and not skewed to favor religion or non-religion in its construction. And secondly, that there be an free and independent decision maker other than the government who is directing children to whatever school. And in this case, of course, it's the parents who are directing the children. So those are the 2 components of a constitutional school choice program: religious neutrality and parental choice. And I'm happy to say that in reviewing SB1, it meets both.
Great. Thank you, Dick. Matt, why is school choice such an important issue to FreedomWorks and in general?
Well, I look at what's going on across the country right now in all of the states, and you really see different iterations of the very same battle. In Wisconsin, we've all watched as the governor there takes on union power and tries to rein in a very small, very privileged interest group, government employees, who have literally bankrupted the state. You have the same fight going on in Ohio in the context of balancing the budget. You have fights in Indiana and Florida. Here in Pennsylvania, the fight is about monopoly power in our schools. And as an economist that went to Grove City College, that's where I get my economics from, I look at what's going on in Pennsylvania and the failure of the public school system to educate children through the lens of Milton Friedman. It is a typical result you would expect from a government monopoly. We spend too much and we don't get the results. Over half of our kids in Pennsylvania at the 11th grade level can't read and do math at a proficient level. That's simply not acceptable. And this isn't about economics. This is about children's lives. It's more important than just the numbers. We have to do something about that. And from my perspective, if we beat the teachers' union in Pennsylvania, we have an opportunity to do this all over the country. If we lose, if we trim our sails, if we don't show up, we lose everywhere. We don't just lose in Pennsylvania. And again, think about it in terms not of numbers, not in terms of balancing the budget, but in terms of futures of individual children and whether or not they have an opportunity to succeed in this country.
Thank you. You know, it's interesting you raised the name of Milton Friedman. Leslie, could you share with us, tell us about Dr. Friedman. Is it true that he actually did develop the voucher idea or voucher concept?
Yes, and thank you, Matt. I also look at this through the lens of Dr. Milton Friedman. Dr. Friedman was a Nobel laureate in economics, and as part of his work, he would take a look at governmental programs and he'd analyze those programs and try to figure out if they were working properly, could they be done more efficiently. Dr. Friedman was a person who advised presidents throughout his lifetime. In 1955, he took a look at our system of funding education and apparently was quite stunned to find that the system that we had then, which we currently have today, is actually a socialist model. It's a socialist model for funding education. And it's quite startling to think that this model can exist within a free market economy. He predicted in 1955, and I might add, the first time he spoke about this publicly was in a magazine article. This is how it all started. He predicted at that time that if this type of monopoly funding system were allowed to continue, that it would ultimately result in mediocrity. And in fact, that's what we're seeing today. The level of academic achievement across the country has fallen so low that I think all of us should be deeply concerned for the future of the country just based on our knowledge base. So yes, in fact, it was Dr. Friedman who first developed the idea that if we give the power of education, put that solely into the hands of parents rather than having pure government control over all educational decisions, if we can change that system, then we can accomplish two things. Number one, we can escape the monopoly system and the socialist funding method. But also, and I might add this is something I'm seeing across the country, it's also a way to change people's hearts and minds in the way that they view their own control and their own freedom within this country. If the government is the one who's paying for your child's education, and I put that in quotes, versus you having the check that you take to the school of your choice, or you take it to another school of your choice, You as an individual have that power. And I might add that, that in states across this country, Pennsylvania is no exception, the funding for education is one of the biggest parts of the state budget. So for individuals to have that control rather than the government telling us what to do, that's very powerful. And yes, that came from Dr. Milton Friedman.
Yes, thank you, Leslie. And Senator Piccola, could you please share and provide a brief overview of Senate Bill 1 and how it's going to empower the parents and put money back into the hands of the parents in the community?
How brief?
Well, we have 38 minutes.
Only kidding. Yeah, I could go really deep into the weeds here, but I won't. In fact, I have a very limited number of copies of the most recent PowerPoint that we have on Senate Bill 1 available, and if you come up afterwards, I'll be happy to give it to you until the supply runs out. In addition, if you want a copy and I don't have enough, I'll take your name and address and we'll make sure you get one. I want to emphasize one point. This is not the way Senate Bill 1 is currently written. In large part it is, but we're going to be offering some significant amendments in the Appropriations Committee next week, and this is the way it will look like after those amendments are adopted. I'm very pleased to hear my three fellow panelists talk about the issue of choice, because in my view, Senate Bill 1 does in fact begin the process of breaking the monopoly. I believe firmly it is constitutional, and I believe that it is coming at the unions, but from their flank, not head-on like they're doing in Wisconsin. The details of the bill, to try to simplify them as much as possible, we take the existing EITC Education Improvement Tax Credit program, which is hugely successful and hugely popular here in Pennsylvania, and it is a potentially great benefit for the middle class. We enhance it by adding $25 million in tax credits to it in the first year, and then in the out years we increase those available tax credits by 5% annually. In addition, we do some adjustments in the eligibility requirements, the income eligibility requirements, to further make more of the middle class eligible for the scholarships under the EITC program. The second part, which is the voucher program, and I like the word voucher personally. I have no problem with it. PSEA doesn't like it, but that's their problem. The voucher portion is new, and it is basically, we like to say we're triaging the use of the voucher. In the first year, it will be aimed at low income, and I emphasize when I use the word voucher, with one exception in the amendment that we're going to be offering, I'm referring to parents who are income eligible, that is low income, 130% of poverty, which is basically your free and reduced lunch. We triage by, in the first year, making it available to those students who attend the lowest performing school buildings in our Commonwealth, the lowest 5% of underperforming, academically performing schools, which is about 144 buildings. In year two, it becomes available to all students who reside in, this is income eligible students, who reside in the catchment areas of those lowest 5% performing schools. In year three, it becomes available across the Commonwealth to all of those income eligible parents across the Commonwealth. We are going to be adding a year four, and without getting into too many details, basically what year four will be is a middle class voucher program, basically using some of the excess tuition funds that are generated during the first years of the program and using it to create a scholarship or a voucher program for those parents income eligible from 130% of poverty up to 300% of poverty. It would be pretty much of a pilot program, but I want to emphasize it becomes very easy if we get this template and in large measure, Senate Bill 1 is a template for the future in addition to being an immediate program. It becomes very easy to expand it by just simply amending a percentage or amending a couple of words to enlarge the program and make more people income eligible. So that is kind of the overview. I could go really deep into the weeds, but I think I'll avoid that now.
Well, actually, I'll ask you a deep in the weeds question.
Okay?
You know, several people have said that this is just another entitlement program. What are your thoughts on that
Well-
argument or concept?
Well, the entitlement program has already been created. Every year, the General Assembly appropriates, it's around $5 billion. It's probably going to be 5.3 in a line item called our basic education subsidy. And it goes out, it's driven out to school districts based on a formula, and it's based upon, it goes more heavily to low-income districts as opposed to high-income districts, but that's the way it's driven out. And the districts get it every year, year in and year out, and it's an entitlement. And if you divide that number, whatever it is for a school district, by the number of children in that district, that is a number that is appropriated by the General Assembly, your tax dollars, statewide tax dollars, to educate a child. So that entitlement already exists. All we're doing is saying, instead of the system to which we have appropriated that money, namely a school district, spending that money to ostensibly and probably poorly and perhaps not even at all educating that child, we are going to say the parent may take that dollar amount, which is already appropriated, and saying that you parent can take that dollar amount and choose an educational opportunity for your child that best meets their needs. So there's an entitlement that's already been created, and we call it public schools.
A $26 billion entitlement.
It is a $26 billion industry, I call it. It's a heavy industry, as a matter of fact. Heavily unionized industry.
Thank you. Matt, how do you answer the critics who say the bill just does not go far enough?
Well, unfortunately, I've been in this fight for almost 20 years now, and I can speak from a FreedomWorks perspective. We were there in Florida when Jeb Bush was trying to pass his program. Dick Armey, my chairman, was actually the original author of what became the D.C. school choice bill. And obviously, Milwaukee was the first best test case where we proved that choice actually works. But I will tell you that most of our fights have been failures. And I've watched in states like Texas, of all places, where a very good idea for statewide school choice was defeated not by Democrats, but by Republicans that were more afraid of the unions than they were of us. So here we are in Pennsylvania. We have an opportunity to pass the biggest statewide voucher program that has ever been proposed, not proposed, but the most viable one that I have ever seen in my lifetime. We're going to pass this bill, and we have to pass this bill by convincing those Republicans in the middle. Dick Armey, by the way, calls them the bedwetters caucus.
Nice.
Do you know what a political bedwetter is? A political bedwetter is someone that's going to give their vote to the constituency that they're most afraid of. So the question for all of you is, are they more afraid of you, or are they more afraid of the teachers' union? That's the bottom line. If from my perspective, if we can get one child out of a failing school, that's victory. If we can get a third of the entire population in Pennsylvania out of a failing school, we should embrace that with everything we have.
Agreed. Thank you. So, Leslie, Matt raised an important issue regarding the unions as being an obstacle. Are you aware of what are the greatest obstacles as it relates to the passage of school choice programs that you've seen on a national level?
Well, first I would concur with everything that Matt just said. He really put his finger on a problem that we confront across the country. We haven't found the right answer to being able to overcome that opposition other than what I always believe in, which is simply the power of individuals to make a difference. And that's where you all come in, and this is what we practice on a daily basis as individuals to go forward and continue to fight for what we believe is right. In terms of obstacles, and to the point regarding the unions, I find one of the biggest obstacles is fear. And our opponents are very good at scaring the heck out of people. Oh, if you pass a voucher bill, all your public schools will close, and your children will go to schools where they won't be taught how to read and write. They'll be taught crazy things, and society will fall. I mean, and this is literally the kind of rhetoric that comes across, and it's very troubling to me because people will kind of go along with that. And I think part of the reason why they'll go along with that and not really challenge it too much is because we don't yet have that broad-based support in a voucher program where we can hold it up and say, look, now we do have very strong voucher programs across the country that have as many as 25,000 children in Florida, for example, on a voucher program. It's been very, very successful. But, you know, that's in Florida, that's, you know, people in Pennsylvania or in my home state of Indiana. Well, you know, that's nice, good for them. But if you can't see it for yourself, it tends to be a difficult thing for people to embrace. And that really is, goes to the second obstacle I see, and that is, I'd call it a cultural way of thinking where people tend to be very apathetic and have accepted this notion that government is providing more and more and more for us. And, well, I'm doing all right. My kids aren't really too bad off, so why should I really take the time out of my busy day to really fight for this? It's okay. And that kind of mindset is also one of the biggest obstacles we face, because of course with school choice, if parents are making that decision, if parents are controlling that decision and how this money is spent, well, that requires personal responsibility. And that's the piece that it's hard to get people to embrace that. I wish it wasn't so, but I will say that I find that across the country. And then one other thing that has come up here just recently in the wake of my friend Dick Comer's wonderful victory at the U.S. Supreme Court this week, upholding the tax credit scholarship case in Arizona, the issue of the separation of church and state, and I put that in quotes as well, where people will question, well, can this money really go to a private school if they teach religion? Is that right? Is that okay under our Constitution? We have two very strong U.S. Supreme Court rulings on that saying, yes, it is absolutely, positively constitutional. This is private action by private individuals. We're all good with that. And yet people will still scratch their heads. Yes, thank you. Thank you. And yet people will still scratch their heads and say, gosh, is that right? At the Senate education hearing in Indiana just a couple days ago, one of the senators asking the question about constitutionality, when told about these U.S. Supreme Court constitutional decisions supporting school choice, said, well, I don't quite believe that. Is that true? Well, yeah, it's true. In 2002 and now in 2011, very strong decisions. And the response was, well, I just don't think that's quite right. Okay, the problem with that response is that it does not respect our Constitution and our system of separation of powers and the authority of the U.S. Supreme Court to be the arbiter of these decisions. That is an obstacle to school choice, and that is something that we must continue to fight on a daily basis.
Thank you, Leslie. Senator, there have been several questions that have been raised regarding what benefit does this bill have to middle-class Pennsylvanians? There have been several people that have argued that this bill, again, is another entitlement program. I think the audience, as well as the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, would like to know, to what benefit does it have to middle-class Pennsylvanians?
Well, as I indicated earlier, we enhanced the EITC program. We create a fourth-year middle income voucher. But I guess the elephant in the room is, you know, why, and I think Bob Guzzardi, he passed the question up, why didn't we start with a universal choice bill? Well, it's very simple. You can't pass it. You can't pass it. I'm not even sure I could have gotten any sponsors for it, but I would love to do it, but the practical problems of that in terms of just doing that kind of a program overnight are immense and probably inexplicable to anybody that you would be asking to vote for this. As I said, this bill has been very carefully constructed, not just from looking at choice from a variety of different angles in terms of failing schools, poor children, middle class, but also in creating a template wherein it becomes very easy, or relatively easy, certainly easier than this battle, to very simply amend it, a future legislature and a future governor, amend it to increase the eligibility, to enhance the EITC program more, combine them in ways that perhaps we haven't even thought of. One of the things you have to do to get this kind of legislation universally approved is to create a constituency for it. We've actually done that to some degree with the EITC program, but there is still this very, very strong constituency out there for the public schools, and I think if we enact this Senate Bill 1 and it becomes very successful, it achieves the results that it's intended in 3 or 4 years, it becomes a relatively easy matter to amend it. And as Matt said, if you beat these constituency groups, the unions and the PSBAs and all the alphabet soup organizations out there that supposedly speak for the education of kids but really only speak for the employment of adults, then when you engage in that battle down the road to amend it, it becomes a whole lot easier. I would love to have universal choice. In fact, that's one of the goals that this bill envisions, because you want to lay the template and the pathway for that down the road. But I can't get the votes for that now, and I'm pushing the envelope about as far, I think, as we can today. But I think if we lay down the guidelines and the pathway to universal choice, which I think we do in this bill, I think we've achieved a major, major victory.
Thank you.
If I could just make 2 quick comments on that. We definitely need to get to universal choice for all parents. And if we don't pass this bill, we'll never get to that bill. But more importantly, understand how competition works and understand what we're doing is we are punching a hole in the monopoly power of the unions. And if you give every parent a choice, it doesn't mean that every parent is going to make the decision to move their children to another school, but that pressure changes the behavior of every single school in this state.
That's right.
That's what we're doing with this bill.
And it changes the dynamic at the bargaining table, too, because right now it's very one-sided, and the more choices you give parents, and who are in essence the customers, the more leverage you give these school directors to negotiate with a union that has to negotiate in the real world. And we have some other ideas not outside of Senate Bill 1 to further enhance that. That's not the topic here, but we have some other ideas on that as well.
These next set of questions have come from the audience. What I'd like to do is just open it up to the panel to weigh in if they see fit. The first question is, how much control will the Pennsylvania government have over the private sector schools in the event SB 1 is passed?
No more than they have now, so there's no further intrusion into the private schools operation. I mean, that's been one of the major goals of drafting this bill.
Thank you, Senator. This is for Leslie. It's stated that this program puts choice back. You've stated that this program puts choice back in the parents' hands, not government. This is a government program, is it not?
I don't see it as a government program because it's your money. It's your tax dollars that's funding this, and currently it's your tax dollars that are going to schools that are failing your children. This allows for your tax dollars to be used in your own way to send your own children to schools that will not fail your children. I believe very fundamentally that, that for all of the government programs that we call government programs, these are programs of our tax dollars. And again, that very basic philosophy that we own the government and not vice versa is core to the principle of school choice.
Otto, could I?
Absolutely, Senator.
I guess you could argue it's a government program, but I see my good friend Mike Fulmer, citizen Mike Fulmer, out there, and he's a very enthusiastic supporter of Senate Bill 1, and a believer in our Constitution, state and federal. And our state Constitution explicitly provides that the General Assembly shall provide for a thorough and efficient system of public education to benefit the needs of the Commonwealth. That's help me, Mike, if I'm wrong, Article 3, Section 14, I believe. So we do have a responsibility to provide for we're not very thorough and we're not very efficient, but we try. And I think this, if we move in the direction of universal choice, will be a way that we can meet our constitutional responsibilities.
Thank you, Senator. Will children eligible for the voucher program be able to transfer cross school districts? For instance, could children in Harrisburg transfer to Derry Township, or children in Philadelphia be able to attend better schools in Montgomery County?
Well, there is a public-to-public option within the bill, and I think that's also one of the constitutional requirements that we have to provide for in any choice bill. It just can't be public to private. It has to be the potential for public to public. But there's no requirement that any school, public or private for that matter, accept any student. So participation in the program for receiving schools is voluntary.
Thank you, Senator. What ideas are there to provide a share of the tax base for taxpayers who choose to homeschool?
Well, we do provide for a very extensive system of cyber charter schools in this state, which I think has benefited homeschoolers tremendously. But there's the pure homeschooler, there is nothing in the bill to deal with that.
Thank you. I have another question. What about all the children left behind in those failing schools? What about their education? What is the Philadelphia School Partnership? Why not open the voucher to all the children in failing schools?
Well, I'll weigh in on that with respect to the children who are who remain in the public schools under a voucher program. These voucher programs across the country have been studied deeply by some pretty tremendous researchers who've done very high quality research. And one of the questions that they've asked is that very question: what happens to the public schools where they lose some of their kids? And the answer is that they improve. Again, yes, they improve. And if you think about it, and think about what Matt said about competition and the pressure that that places in the system, It's very interesting to watch how when a public school knows that, oh, they may lose some of these kids and, oh, there's money attached to these kids and they're going to lose that money, all of a sudden, well, maybe they should start doing better. Maybe they should start meeting the needs of these children. The most recent example of that comes from Oklahoma, where they passed a voucher for children with special needs. Every child in the state of Oklahoma who has an individualized education plan, an IEP, is eligible to receive a voucher to go to the school of his or her choice. And the Tulsa School District that wasn't very happy about this bill and fought it, at their school board meeting, they said, well, gosh, if these kids want to leave, then, well, maybe we should try to keep them. Maybe we should try to actually educate them a little better. And there was a public comment that, yeah, we pretty much ignored them up till now. I guess we can't do that anymore. It's shocking. It's absolutely shocking to think about it, but that's actually what has happened when these programs have been enacted. So all the children gain from this program.
Thank you. Matt, why should the Tea Party support this bill?
I think this is very much a debate about first principles. I think the question is whether or not you will allow a privileged constituency of government employees to dictate how and how much we spend on educating our children. I think that's the bottom line. And it'll have important positive budget implications, but the choice here is whether or not we support the rights of parents to decide for themselves what's best for their children, or do we want the Pennsylvania Teachers Union to do it? That's the bottom line. I think that's a no-brainer for any Tea Partier I know.
Great, thank you. Actually, Dick, what would Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and John Stuart Mill think about SB 1?
Back before liberalism was a dirty word, liberals actually believed that liberty was an important part of liberalism. And all of those folks in writing about education, but most important, particularly John Stuart Mill in his essay on liberty, spoke of what are essentially voucher-type programs as a desirable means of providing publicly funded education. And I urge you, if you, like Otto, carry around a copy of On Liberty in your car,
I do.
that you look at that and see what Mill had to say, because he said that it was very important if what you want is a diversity of ideas and free minds, that we have a free choice-based education system. So thank you, Otto, for that question.
Great, thank you. Senator Piccola, could you please, do you think, where is the SB 1 in the legislative process?
As we speak, the bill is pending in the Senate Appropriations Committee. As I indicated, there will be an amendment offered to the bill in committee to, I think, improve it vastly. The committee will report it out with a fiscal note so that all this jabber about this is going to cost us $1 billion and the ads I'm hearing, it's a voucher tax, all of which are completely bogus, will be put to rest. Once the bill is reported out of committee, it will be available to be voted on the floor of the Senate. I'm reasonably confident that we have the votes in the Senate to do that, and I would believe that it will pass the Senate sometime between now and the end of April, possibly as early as this coming week.
Great, thank you, Senator. You know, here's a great question that really should be addressed in open forum, and I'm glad someone actually posed it. It says, there is a fear in our local public school, which is great, that it will inundate the school district with failing low-income students from neighboring school districts. Will it cost our school district more or less to educate that child?
I'll take it. This is sort of what I was getting at earlier. The experience we've seen whenever school choice programs are implemented are that most parents do not make the very difficult and draconian choice of removing their child from a failing school and moving somewhere else. That's the last thing you want to do to your kid unless you actually absolutely have to, usually for safety reasons. What happens is you change the behavior of the schools and the school bureaucracy, and if one person makes that choice, it changes the behavior of everybody. So what you're really doing is you're impacting that decision at the margin, and you're forcing the local schools to step up and start delivering the services that they need to be delivering.
Senator, would you like to weigh in?
No, I believe that is in fact the case. In fact, you can see it to a certain, and I will admit minor extent, in the city of Philadelphia, which has engaged in a relatively massive charter school movement over the last decade since we've had a charter school law in this state. And it verifies everything Matt said, that parents, in many cases, because of safety issues, choose to move and try to get into another school setting with their child. Presently, there are about 25,000 to 30,000 kids on waiting lists to get into charter schools in the city of Philadelphia alone, which demonstrates that there is a market out there. And if you believe in free enterprise, when the market is created, and this voucher will create a market, there will be entrepreneurs, there will be existing schools that will be there ready to meet that market demand, and I think parents and the schools will be vastly benefited from this.
Thank you, Senator. Would anyone else like to address the issue of the fear of the local public schools receiving or being inundated with low-income students from neighboring districts?
I think in describing SB 1, Senator Piccola mentioned that it's voluntary on the part of neighboring public schools whether they take kids from who are eligible for these scholarships in public-to-public transfers. And in the Cleveland program, which we defended in the Supreme Court 10 years ago, there was a similar provision, and quite frankly, none of the neighboring school districts to Cleveland agreed to take kids from Cleveland for the simple reason that the kids in Cleveland were grossly underprepared and simply weren't capable of performing immediately in the neighboring public schools. So it was really only transfers to private schools that occurred in the Cleveland program.
And I'd like to speak to that also because this touches a nerve with me. In Indianapolis, I was one of the founders, and I'm currently the board chairman of a charter school about 9 years ago. And in our school, we've had a lot of kids who've come to our school who are the kids that you're talking about here. And it seems that there's an underlying assumption that if a child is poor, if a child comes from a bad neighborhood, then that child is going to cost twice as much to educate and it's just going to be a problem in the schools. And our experience has frankly been quite the opposite. We find, for example, when we opened a high school, we found children who would come to us in the 10th grade with 5th grade skills. Now, that's a pretty tall order to try to educate that child and to be able to do so in a couple years in a school where we require AP courses for graduation. This was tough to do. However, what we found is that when children for the first time experience the excitement of the joy of learning, when for the first time in their lives they realize, yes, they are capable of learning, These are the students who are our best students. These are the students who work the hardest and who are happy to do so. So I'd like to just set that out there right from the get-go, that I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing to have children come to you that are ill-prepared. They may turn out to be your best students.
Thank you.
Otto, could I add another?
Absolutely, Senator.
This is one of the points that infuriates me, because it exposes the, I think, underlying racial and perhaps even religious, but I think this one's racial bigotry of the opponents of this legislation. First of all, it's accurate. There's no requirement any school take any child. So the public schools don't have to certify a number and take kids, as has been in other proposals. But if these people that sit on school boards, and I know this is tough for people who have worked in monopolies all their lives to do, but if they would think about this for a moment and have maybe 5 seats available in an elementary school that they're not going to be able to fill, if they would take a child from a neighboring district with a $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 voucher to fill those 5 seats, and let's say it's 10, so my math isn't tested here, that's $50,000 at no expense to those receiving schools that would, at the very least, benefit the taxpayers of that receiving school district. So another, I think, side benefit of this thing is to get these school directors, and there are many good school directors in this state, but in the aggregate, they don't think outside the box of what they have learned over the years in running a monopoly system. If they would start to think as entrepreneurs, they could use this kind of legislation not only to benefit the kids, but to benefit the taxpayers.
Thank you, Senator. Actually, I received a question from an audience member directed to the audience, which is very interesting. It says, questions for those in the audience who are opposing SB 1. Which set of groups do you want to be aligned with? Of course, on the one side, it says against SB 1, NEA, AFT, NAACP, ACLU, PSEA. And then it says most Democrats. It is, and then the other side, respectfully, ladies and gentlemen, respectfully, and I am, be respectful. I respect you, I'm giving your questions, I'm responding your questions, and then it says Freedom Works, PA Family Institute, Reach Alliance, Center for Education Reform, Institute for Justice, Foundation for Educational Choice, Association of Christian Schools, PA Coalition for Responsible Government, the Diocese of Pittsburgh, Kitchen Table Repatriates, and Hillel Academy in Pittsburgh are those that are in support of SB 1. So that's just the question that has been posed. And I thank you for your response as well, because this is a forum, and I respect your position as well.
Otto, could I just maybe comment on that a little bit?
Absolutely, Senator.
I respect people who oppose this, and I can understand. It is not a perfect bill. As I think I indicated earlier, it is not a perfect bill. A perfect bill couldn't pass, but I don't think we should defeat it because it's not perfect. As long as it meets the criteria that I think have been set forth up here, and as long and I said this from the day I started my staff working on this last July. I said one of the things we have to get, not negotiable, is a method by which we get from here to universal choice, a pathway. This bill has that. And if that's what you believe in, this is the best opportunity in 2011, and probably the best opportunity you're going to get any time in the near future.
I have one last question before we wrap up, and then I'll allow each panelist to have some closing remarks. This one's actually directed to Matt. What can the grassroots be doing to ensure that SB 1 passes? And for that matter, how is FreedomWorks helping?
The Senator Piccola pointed out that we do expect this bill to pass the Senate. How it passes the Senate matters a lot. We can pass it with a simple majority, or we can pass it with a massive majority. If we pass it with a massive majority, that makes our chances of passing it in House that much better. The mantra here is government goes to those who show up. The Pennsylvania Teachers Union are working overtime to kill this bill. If you don't show up, they will win. Simple as that. And in the House, I mentioned this earlier, every House has one, but there is a bedwetters caucus in the Pennsylvania House that is trying to decide right now whether or not they're going to give their vote to the teachers union, or are they going to give their vote to the citizens in this room and the citizens that believe that parents should have a choice, not the union. So if you don't show up, you will lose. It's how it always works. That's what the Tea Party movement's all about. It's all about giving a voice back to citizens and citizens taking control of their government from these special interests. What we need to do is everything that you guys do every day. You need to call, you need to visit, you need to rally, you need to look at the targets that we're happy to provide you, but I think you guys know who these guys are. And you need to make sure that they know that you're watching their behavior and you expect them to do the right thing. And if you don't do the right thing, there are political consequences to doing the wrong thing. That's what we're trying to do in this state. I'm a Pennsylvania boy, but I understand that you guys are in charge of this state. You guys have to make the decision for yourself whether or not you support this bill and whether or not you're willing to commit your time to beat the teachers union on this what I think is one of the most important issues going on in the United States today. We will offer you any tools that you need to do that, but to be honest with you, my experience with the movement over the last 2 years, when we were training people how to show up and how to schedule district office visits, you guys do it better than we do now. So we humbly are here to support you. I'm not here to tell you how to win a legislative fight because you guys know how to do that. But if you want our help, and if you want our help trying to find a sponsor for a universal voucher, and you want our help getting co-sponsors, and you want our help organizing events and rallies, we're going to be there. This fight just starts today, and if we win this fight, then we finish the job, and we not just finish it in Pennsylvania, but we take it to Ohio and Florida, and pretty soon, we got our country back.
Thank you. Just maybe 2-minute closing remarks. Ladies, of course, before gentlemen.
Thank you, Otto. Again, thanks for the privilege of being with you. I can tell that this is a crowd who loves liberty, and for me, that is at the core of school choice. School choice supports those who love liberty and individual freedom, and that's why I get up every day and go to work with a smile on my face, because I think that's a fight worth fighting. I have 2 children of my own. Both of my children are in college right now, and at some point, like so many of us, grandchildren, you start thinking about that when your kids go off to college. So for me, I know that, as Matt said, that this is the beginning of a fight for freedom that we're not going to win in 1 year. This will take some time. It will take continued dedication of all of us. But when I look at my 2 children and think about their future, and I think about the future of our country and what I'd like that to be, I'd like to see the fundamentals of our Constitution preserved and embraced and practiced every day. Not quite seeing that currently. That's what I'd like to see. That's why I fight for this. That's why I ask you to join us in this fight. I might also offer to you, at our foundation, our website is edchoice.org, and you will find some materials there that might be useful to you. The first is the ABCs of school choice. This explains all of the different school choice programs across the country. And there's great variety here, so there's a lot of food for thought here. There is also another publication that we recently put out called Win-Win 2.0. This is the body of research that I discussed. We had one of our researchers gathered together all of the results of that research so that you can see the results, the positive results of school choice across the country. And this is the kind of information you'll need when you go home, and you talk to your next door neighbor, and you talk to the neighbor down the street, and I hope you'll do so. Thank you again.
Thanks, Leslie.
edchoice.org.
Dick, brief remarks? Thank
Brief, okay. There's so many things I'd like to say, but I'm constrained by being sort of the constitutional lawyer on the panel, and so I'm going to just talk about the Pennsylvania Constitution. And on that, I have good news, bad news, and good news. The good news is that under the Pennsylvania Constitution and your interpretations from your state Supreme Court, basically it's parallel to the federal Constitution, so that what I said about the federal standards applies to the Pennsylvania Constitution. And therefore, because we believe it's constitutional under the federal Constitution, it is also constitutional under the Commonwealth Constitution. That's the good news. The bad news is that if let's say when SB 1 passes, it will be challenged because it does step on a lot of very big and powerful toes. And it'll be challenged in state court. And the state will defend it, the Attorney General will defend it, and we will intervene on behalf of parents in Pennsylvania who want to make use of the scholarships. And, you know, we'll have a fight. It'll probably be all three levels of the Pennsylvania courts. We may lose at some stage, but I think we will win at the ultimate stage, which is the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So that's the final good news. And I would like to just point out one thing for you all, which is that vouchers have already had a big impact in Pennsylvania because vouchers make charter schools the compromise position, and is why you have charter schools in Pennsylvania. It's because in the past years, voucher bills have looked like they might get somewhere in the General Assembly. And because of that, compromise has always been, and this isn't true in every state in the union, including Arizona, which has the most liberal charter school law, that any time vouchers are considered, charter schools are accepted as a compromise. The teachers' unions are less fearful of charter schools than of vouchers.
Thank you. Matt?
Let me ask a question. Did anyone come to the September 12th March on Washington in 2009? It's pretty cool. You didn't realize that you had 1 million friends that all believed the same values that you believed, and we all came together, and that was a moment when all of these local organizations turned into a massive protest movement. And there's been different iterations of this grassroots uprising we now all sort of call the Tea Party. First, we were a protest movement, and we had to do that because Washington and the state capitals and the political establishment were ignoring us, right? Media said we didn't exist. And then they said, well, they finally sort of grudgingly said, yes, you guys exist, but surely you're not going to get out the vote in November. And we proved them wrong again. And now, if you read the papers, you hear that once again we're sort of fading away. We don't really matter anymore. Predicting once again that this citizen movement that we all belong to is going to go away. Well, here's this next step. The next step in our evolution, we've gone from protest movement to get out the vote machine to legislative discipline on the officials that we help get elected in November. This is the next step. And it matters at the state level. It matters at the federal level. A lot of federal Republicans are now watching the states to see what happens because they're also nervous about doing the right thing. They're afraid that somebody might not understand if we do the right thing. Well, that's our job. Our job is to stay there and to understand the very difficult process of getting to the principles that we all believe in through the very messy process of legislation. David Spielman, who was sitting there, who just disappeared, Brendan Steinhauser, Amanda Schelp, FreedomWorks staff are here. We've created a war room that will help you if you want to fight this particular fight, or if you want to fight other fights. There's a lot of fights here. We'd love to help you, but we all have this burden on our shoulders that we got from the founders to keep showing up, to keep eternally vigilant on this process, because if we don't take our country back, surely big government will.
Thanks, Matt. Senator?
Very briefly, we have 0 time left. And I want to thank you for taking those steps that Matt alluded to, because I've been watching from outside the electoral process last year, anticipating that those steps would be taken. Got my staff set last July working on this bill, had hearings in October, even before the election, anticipating that you all would take those steps. You did. We have Senate Bill 1, I think is a huge step forward for all the reasons that we've talked about here. I have never been this excited about real change in education that you can believe in, and really believe in, than I am now. But there is a window of opportunity, and that window will close at the end of June. And we have to all double our efforts between now and the end of June to make sure that Senate Bill 1 becomes the law of the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. In closing, yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery, but there's no greater time than today to make a difference. And that's why they call it the present. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause for